Welcome to What If Deku Became a Ghost. The End. Ray. Came a shout. Ray turned and saw Kirishima running over to her. I didn't know you were a hero in training? What school do you go to? Ray smiled slightly. I'm homeschooled. Both of my parents are heroes, so I can go to things like this. Ida seemed to have spotted her and walked over, followed by a brown-haired girl. I wasn't aware to were from a hero family. Ray shrugged. My parents are the heroes Zero and Marine. They're in the stands. Hi. The brown-haired girl introduced. I'm Ochako Uraka. Ray smiled at her. Ray Hagakure. Toru's my twin sister. At that, half of Class 1E ran over to her and started shouting various things. I didn't know Hagakure had a sister. What's your quirk? I like your boobs. Ray threw Mineta across the room, then started answering everyone's questions. Izuku was waiting in the stands with the 4 pro heroes. He took the opportunity to find out as much about their quirks as he could, hoping that he would be able to remember it for when he could write it down. Izawa was also doing some digging. Asking what high school he went to, when his birthday was, what his parents' quirks were. Izuku managed to come up with answers for all of them, and Izawa eventually gave up. Eventually, Izuku prepared himself and asked him the question he had been thinking the entire time. So, the way you reacted when you heard my name, has Bakugo mentioned me? Izawa's eyes shot to Izuku. Yeah, I think he has. Izuku leaned back in his seat. Really? But Bakugo always calls me Deku, so you wouldn't recognize the name even if he had. I don't think he would mention me at all, to be honest. Izawa felt panic run through him. It might have been Toru? He said, though it sounded more like a question. Izuku stared at Izawa. I didn't think she would mention me in front of a teacher. He muttered. Izawa only just heard him. He cleared his throat and glanced around. The other had gone to grab drinks for when the test started again. Since you knew Bakugo, you might be able to answer a question for me. Izuku nodded. Has Bakugo killed anyone? Izuku's body went tense and he stared straight forward, avoiding Izawa's gaze. How much did Izawa know? He looked down at the floor and nodded slowly. There was a quirkless boy at our school. Everyone made fun of him, Bakugo worse than anyone. The boy killed himself, a bit more than a year ago. I remember Bakugo went home early that day, said he was ill. I think he blamed himself for the boy's death. Izawa looked at Izuku. His story sounded true but something was still off. Were you close to him? The boy. Izuku's face fell. I'm going to get a drink. And with that, he floated away, making sure Izawa was looking away before gloating out of the arena. He floated up to the roof and lay down there, looking over the edge into the arena. He saw Izawa sat there, looking thoughtful. The other heroes joined them and Izawa said something to them. They looked confused and all 4 heroes stood up and walked off. Izuku took his phone from his pocket and texted Ray, telling her what happened. She responded quickly saying about what was happening with her. He took a deep breath and messaged her to tell Bakugo about it as well. He needed Bakugo to play along with his lies if he wanted to get away with them. If Izawa asked Bakugo about him and he said anything wrong, then Izawa will get even more suspicious. Ray read Izuku's message and pushed through the crowd, searching for the spiky-haired blonde. She managed to find him and gave him her phone. He read through the messages and passed it back to her. Fine. Whatever. Ray walked back over to the rest of the class. What was that about? You know Bakugo? Why did you give him your phone? Toru gave her a sympathetic smile and she turned to the class. A friend of mine grew up with him. They wanted me to show him something. She looked over at Toru. We should be preparing for the next round. She grabbed Toru's hand and they started walking over to an empty corner. It'll probably be teams or rescue. Izuku left before the end of the test. He couldn't stop the painful memories from resurfacing. Memories of being punched, kicked, knocked down, abandoned, unloved. Memories of everything someone had looked down on him because of his quirklessness. Of every time he had been bullied, assaulted, abused, hurt, over and over again. Then he remembered that day. His last day. The day he lost everything. The day he gave up trying. Why? He thought. Why? 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 The words that he had heard every day since he was 4, the words he tried so hard to ignore. I'm sorry. Quirkless extra. Take a swan dive off the roof. You'll never be a hero. I'm sorry, but you will never be a hero. Words said so easily, so quickly, as if they meant nothing. As if they weren't important. There were 3 people who had broken him. His mum, who had given up immediately. Bakugo, who had bullied him day after day. And All Might, who gave him that last nudge over the edge. But All Might had retired after the Camino incident. It's not like he could meet him anyway. Unless. He started flying off in a different direction. He pulled his phone from his pocket and called Mirio. It took a minute but he picked up. Izuku, I'm in class, why are you calling me? Mirio asked. I'm flying to UA. I want that meeting with All Might, now. What? The sound of a chair scraping could be heard in the background. Mirio must have stood up. Why now? I don't even know where he is. Izuku could hear running footsteps. Mirio must be running to find All Might. Because there's something I need to talk to him about. And I have to do it now, before I decide against it. Okay, I'm here. What wall should I float through? East wall, you should be able to see me through a window? Come in here. Without being spotted, if you can. Izuku spotted Mirio and sped towards the window, hoping no one would see him, or recognize him. He looked around the room he was in and saw Mirio and All Might, in his true form, waiting for him. He put his phone back into his pocket and smiled at Mirio. Sorry about the short notice. Someone just happened to say something that brought back bad memories. I figured I might as well try and deal with it while I can. All Might looked down at the boy. His face was pale and he was staring at the boy with wide eyes. Why, you're the boy from the rooftop. The one who... Izuku looked down at the floor. Yeah. The one who killed themself. Mirio looked down at the ghost boy nervously. He remembered how Ray reacted when his last day was brought up. He hoped Izuku would be okay with it. Izuku floated over to one of the seats, and Mirio sat beside him, his eyes following the small green boy. All Might sat opposite them. How are you here? You died. And you didn't have a quirk, so... Izuku shook his head, then explained his quirk to All Might. He sat there, staring at the little boy as he explained what happened to him. He grew angry when he heard about Bakugo and what he did, but Izuku assured him that it was dealt with. Finally, Izuku finished and looked up at the man he had once idolized and gave a weak smile. Words hurt more than you might think, I know that better than anyone. Just, be more careful when talking to people. If someone tells you that they want to be a hero, no matter who they are, tell them that you never know what will happen. That anyone can be a hero if they try hard enough. And that you don't have to be a pro to be a hero. That you don't have to have a powerful quirk to be a hero. You just have to help anyone you can and be kind to others. I needed a hero like that, but I didn't get one. I just want to make sure that the next person does. All Might wiped his eyes and smiled widely at Izuku. You're right. Sometimes pro heroes need to remember that heroism isn't always done through beating villains. Izuku smiled widely and his hand brushed his cheek, wiping away a non-existent tear. Mirio put his hand on the boy's shoulder and he looked up at him with wide green eyes. Izuku looked down at the floor. I think I'm ready now. He looked back up at All Might. There's one last person I need to see. With a quick wave, Izuku flew out of the building. He flew over streets he knew so well, until he spotted the building he was looking for. He flew down and took a deep breath, slowly knocking on the door. It took a minute, but soon a familiar face peered out. Hi, Mum. Inko looked up at Izuku with disbelief, just staring for a minute before throwing the door open and trying to wrap her arms around him, but just passed through him. Sorry. Should have mentioned that. But, I have a quirk, Mum. Inko smiled widely and tears formed in the corners of her eyes. She ushered Izuku inside and followed him. He sat down on the sofa and she started running around, getting him something to drink. It's fine, Mum. I can't drink anyway. She halted and turned to look at him, nodding slowly and moving to sit opposite him, still smiling widely at her son, who looked around the room, taking in the familiar surroundings. He turned back to Burn's side. I guess I have some explaining to do. He took a deep breath and started explaining. About halfway through, Inko burst into tears, sobbing about how she should have noticed. How she should have helped. He assured her that it was fine, that it wasn't her fault. Just as he finished examining, his phone started ringing. He looked down at it and couldn't help but feel guilty. He answered the call and waited for the other person to talk. Izuku, where are you? I thought you said you would be watching? Ray asked. Izuku winced slightly. Sorry. What Izawa said brought back some bad memories. I talked to All Might and I'm currently at my mom's. Sorry about leaving. No, it's fine. Where's your mom's? Me and Toru will head right there. That is if you want us to come? Izuku smiled and gave her the address. She promised she would be there in 10 minutes. Fine, just don't get arrested on the way. Ray hung up and Izuku knew she would have already started making her way there, with her quirk of course. It might be illegal, but, let's be honest, neither Izuku or Ray were very good at following those laws. Izuku looked at Inko with a wide smile. Ray and Toru are on their way. You'll like them, after all. They're my heroes. Toru flopped on the sofa, gripping her stomach. Mirio's meant to be my friend. You would think he would be nicer to me at least. Ray looked down at her with a grin. I'm sure he has his reasons. Why were you fighting him anyway? He's a third year. Toru rolled over on the sofa and groaned. Something about work studies. He was meant to show us the strength of UA's big three or something. At least he was nice enough to say I could do my work study at the same agency as him. Izuku wandered in, trying to solidify his hand inside a knife. So far, nothing was happening. Aren't work studies meant to be for the older years only? First years don't do them. Toru buried her face in a cushion, making it look like the cushion had a weird face-shaped imprint. Something about all the villain attacks happening. That's why we took part in the provisional licensing exams. Can I have a painkiller, or something? I'm going to bruise all over. Izuku sat down next to her, and threw something at her. These are the best for bruising. Take one. Who is Mirio studying with, then? Toru shrugged. I'm not sure who he is. Someone called Sir Nighteye. Izuku froze in place and turned to stare down at Toru. Sir Nighteye? You're going to work with Sir Nighteye? He jumped up from where he was standing, looking like he was going to explode from excitement. His quirk is amazing. He can predict the future, but the conditions needed to activate his quirk are unknown. If you find out what they are, you need to tell me. He is also the only sidekick All Might has ever had. Ray snorted. Calm down, fanboy. It's not even confirmed if she's working with him. He has to choose, it's not up to Mirio. Izuku stuck his tongue out at her. Yeah, but, there's no way he'll say no. This is Toru. How could he say no? Toru smiled through the pain. Thanks, Izuku. Toru nervously followed Mirio into the office and she was very grateful her expressions couldn't be seen. A tall man with green and yellow hair stood next to a machine where a blue-skinned woman was strapped. It appeared that the machine was tickling her. Toru glanced up at Mirio, but he didn't look bothered. She looked back at the man. Please tell me that isn't Sir Nighteye. Sir, Mirio was the first to speak. This is Toru Hagakure, the first year I told you about. The man stopped and looked over at the pair. He glared at Toru, looking annoyed. Toru remembered what Izuku had said, maybe his quirk required eye contact. Hello, sir. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. He looked away and walked over to his desk. You think you have what it takes to be a great hero? She gulped. Mirio had said he liked jokes, so she had expected some a bit more. Light-hearted. Maybe not, but I have what it takes to save people. That's what's important as a hero, not hero ranking and being seen. But I guess I would say that, since I'm at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to being seen. Sir Nighteye's expression didn't change. How was she meant to make him laugh? He looked too serious to smile, yet alone laugh. She felt like she was supposed to be apologizing to him. He continued glaring at her, then pushed his glasses up his nose. I struggle to believe that you don't care for hero rankings. A good ranking leads to money and fame. You claim you don't care for either of these things? Toru looked down at her feet. During the USJ attack, I was seriously hurt. It was a vigilante who saved me, someone who doesn't get for money or fame, but still work hard to save others. Sir Nighteye stood up and walked over to her, placing his hand on her shoulder. It might have been a supportive gesture, but his continuous glare showed otherwise. She smiled slightly. You need eye contact and physical contact to use your quirk, don't you? He dropped her shoulder and stepped back, his firm expression momentarily breaking. You are observant. What gave it away? She smiled a smile no one could see. You looked annoyed when you saw me and there was no other reason for you to touch me. Though it was mostly a guess. She smiled down at the ground and muttered to herself. Izuku must be rubbing off on me. Sir Nighteye continued glaring down at her. It seems I'm unable to use my quirk on you. You realize how dangerous this might be for you. It's dangerous for everyone. I knew that when I joined UA. Sir Nighteye nodded then turned to Mirio. What do you think, Mirio? Do you think she's strong enough to be useful? Mirio perked up and nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. I do. Sir Nighteye sat back at his desk. Fine. You can study under me. Your quirk may be useful in the case we're currently investigating. Be here tomorrow morning. We're having a meeting with all the other agencies who are helping with this case. Toru stood up straight, smiling widely, and looked up at Sir Nighteye. Yes, sir. Toru followed after Mirio, hoping he knew where they were headed. Nighteye had told them to meet him in one of the agency's meeting rooms. There was going to be a meeting between all of the pro-hero agencies who were helping with the Shihasekai case. Toru had only done one patrol yesterday, and she had ended up getting separated from Mirio because she saw a lost kid and he didn't realize she wasn't following. She should have worn her clothes. For Mirio, it had been an exciting patrol, and he ran into Overhaul, the villain they were working to apprehend. However, Toru had spent most of it trying to call Mirio, who had left his phone back at the agency. It had not been a fun day. Mirio pushed open the door to the meeting room and peered inside, before leading Toru in. The room was filled with pro-heroes and UA students. Toru recognized Fatgum and Ryukyu, as Kirishima, Uraka and Su had been telling her about them. Izuku had also told her a story about when Fatgum tried to catch him while he was on patrol. Uraka spotted her immediately and waved at her from her seat next to Ryukyu. Toru waved back, happy she was wearing her gloves. She and Mirio took their seats, next to Nighteye. They were the last two to arrive, so the meeting started. Mirio had to retell the story of his meeting with Overhaul, a story that made Toru's skin crawl, and Nighteye started to explain everything that was known about the villains. When he was finished, Izawa stood up and turned to Nighteye. I think I know some people who would be useful for this case. There was a mutter around the room. Izawa gushed them before continuing. The vigilantes Phantom and Spectre. I know someone who is contact with them and I'm sure they will be more than willing to cooperate. His eyes flicked to Toru and she gave him a thumbs up. The two were planning on helping already. They had been getting as much info from Toru as they could, hoping it would be enough. Vigilantism is illegal. They don't have hero licenses so they cannot help us. We will not work with them. Toru slammed her hands on the table and stood up. Why not? They work to save people, the same as we do. They do the same things that heroes do. They have saved my life multiple times. I was seriously injured at the USJ attack. I'm still alive because of those vigilantes. They are not villains. We can trust them. That, I can guarantee. Yeah. Uraka jumped to her feet. Before I got into UA, I was once attacked by thugs on my way home. Those vigilantes saved me. They're the reason I want to be a hero. Not to mention what they've done at the USJ and Camino Ward. Nighteye sighed. That may be, but Kirishima was the next to stand up. Phantom and Spectre helped me save my best friend. They saved Bakubro, despite, he paused. He was probably going to say about Izuku's past with Bakugo. Despite the fact that they had no reason to. They are heroes, even if the law says otherwise. That's not how this works. Nighteye tried to tell them. Sir, Myrip stood with all due respect, we may need them to help us. Phantom's quirk will allow us to find the girl quickly and to protect her before pros can get there. Fatgum stood up. Yes, and Spectre has a useful quirk as well, one that will make it more likely that we can save the girl. A short-range telekinesis quirk like that is incredibly versatile. Toru tried not to react. She had forgotten that the heroes thought Ray had a telekinetic quirk. Nighteye glared at all the people standing. Fine. Eraserhead, contact them. We will hold another meeting at the same time tomorrow with the vigilantes so we can decide if they will be of use to us. Izawa nodded and looked at Toru, who gave him another big thumbs up. She looked up at Mirio, who was also smiling. She was going to get to work with Izuku and Ray. She happily skipped out of the meeting room, grabbing her phone from her bag, ready to call Izuku and Ray, to give them the news, when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Nighteye standing there, glaring at her. Sir? She asked nervously. You are quick to defend the vigilantes. You must trust them, more than you should. Sometimes, you need to be more doubtful towards others. Being trusting is not always a good thing, poltergeist. Toru smiled widely. It was the first time she had heard someone call her by her hero name. She was a real hero now. Nighteye left and she picked up her phone, calling Izuku, still grinning widely, remembering her hero name. The ghost hero, poltergeist. So you're clear on what you're doing? Nighteye sighed. He felt like he'd asked this a million times, since it seemed like Phantom wasn't listening. Izuku zipped around the room, looking at all of the All Might merchandise littering the walls and shelves. He picked up a figure and turned it around in his hand. Whoa. This is limited edition. I thought I was lucky to have a normal one. Ray sighed and smiled up at the hero. Yes, we're clear. Sorry about him. He's a crazy All Might fanboy, or was, at least, but he's not really an idiot, most of the time anyway. He tends to do our strategy, so I can guarantee he was listening. Nighteye sighed again. Fine, but we have no reason to trust you, remember? If you betray us, we will incarcerate you. Ray nodded. Understood. Izuku, however, flew over to Nighteye and tilted his head in confusion. All Might said you probably wouldn't trust us, but you can. He said to say that we know about One for All, if you doubted us. Nighteye seemed to do a bounce take as he stared at Izuku. All Might told you about One for All? Izuku laughed. Sort of. I realized about it when watching him fight All for One, then Mirio arranged a meeting with All Might so he could explain it all properly. But he does trust us, even if what we do isn't legal. Nighteye leaned back in his chair. Just because All Might trusts you, doesn't mean I should. Izuku shrugged, picking up another All Might figurine and examining it closely. But both Mirio and Toru trust us and you trust both of them, right? We also have some information that could be of use to the heroes regarding the League of Villains, who we believe to be working with the Shihasekai. We saw Chisaki meeting up with the League a few days ago. Ray smiled and started talking. And as you know, we know quite a lot about the League, probably more than the heroes, since I phantom checks on them every few days. In fact, we believe we might know the identity of one of the League's most mysterious members. Izuku took over. Not that they will have anything to do with this case. Shigaraki seems to distrust Chisaki and so will likely only send 1 or 2 members. And since Chisaki will probably choose who, Ray continued, we think it'll probably be Twice and Toga. We can eliminate the possibilities of them sending Magna or Mr. Compress, as Chisaki killed Magna and took Mr. Compress's arm. Nighteye sat back in his chair, watching the two vigilantes carefully. The two were very well coordinated. They had clearly known each other for a long time, so perhaps they should avoid splitting them up? However, Phantom's quirk would be most useful if he went and found the first, meaning that he would have to leave Spectre behind. They should put Spectre on the first group to head inside, ensuring that she meets up with Phantom as soon as possible. However, before then, Phantom and Myrip would be entirely on their own, with no one there to back them up. He looked Phantom up and down and sighed. The boy could only be 14 or 15, only in his first year of high school. Yet, despite this, he was skilled at strategy and combat. Would it be okay to send him in alone? It seems that there are two more to deal with, Shigaraki said, dragging his fingernails along the peeling skin on his neck. Oh? Responded a man wearing a red beak-like mask. He picked up a pace from the board in front of them and moved it forward a space. And why should these two be something to worry about? Shigaraki gritted his teeth, making his move. It's those two vigilantes, Phantom and Spectre. Those two rats have been plaguing us for months. I must admit, I would be quite grateful if you could grind them into dust. Overhaul chuckled. To think you're so worked up over two children. I don't see why these vigilantes should be anything to worry about. He moved another piece. Shigaraki growled, gripping the board and disintegrating it, covering the table in a layer of dust. Oh really? If you think they're so weak, then kill them. Those two little ghosts need to be exorcised. Send them both to hell. Overhaul laughed again. I think I'll enjoy killing them. Two little children who outwitted the famous League of Villains. Shigaraki stood up, walking to the door. Don't say I didn't warn you, he snapped, slamming the door behind him. Rei stood next to Nighteye, eyes fixed on the Chihasekai base. Nighteye had insisted that she stay with him, so he could keep an eye on her. So far, he hadn't managed to use his work on her, but she knew it wasn't long before she would slip up. Izuku flew around the two of them, eyes also fixed on the gates. He and Mirio were going ahead, alone. He had assured her it was okay, but she had made sure that she was in the first group to go after them. Nighteye studied her carefully. He almost couldn't believe how young she was. She had been calm about everything that had happened so far, even after she found out about the little girl they were saving, she had only nodded and gritted her teeth. He supposed that as a vigilante, she would see disturbing things, perhaps worse than heroes would. Nighteye then watched Izuku, flying around in circles. He seemed like he was trying to calm himself down, trying to distract himself from the danger he was having to run into, and with someone he had never fought alongside before. This would be the biggest rescue he had ever done without Rei. He had fought without her before, but now he knew that he wouldn't be the only one of them in danger. Phantom, Nighteye said. Izuku stopped his somersaults and floated at eye level with the hero, his feet dangling a few feet off the floor. Are you and Mirio ready? Izuku smiled and nodded. Yep, ready to go whenever. Mirio nodded, echoing what Izuku had said. Rei couldn't help but grin. Izuku was always ready to help. To be a vigilante, you had to be good, because we'll be attacking in less than a minute. Rei sucked in her breath and her eyes met Izuku's. He gave her a reassuring smile and took his position at the front of the group. Rei stood right behind him. Go. Rei ripped the gates off of their hinges and the heroes poured inside. Izuku and Mirio passed right through the villains, rushing right into the building. Don't be late, Izuku yelled to Rei, who nodded and yelled back to him. Just go. He grinned widely and disappeared into building. Rei used her quirk to knock out the last villain and the heroes also headed inside. This way, Nighteye yelled, opening up a secret passageway. Villains emerged but the heroes quickly captured them, trailing further into the villain's lair. A wall blocked their path, but Rei easily ripped it apart and they stepped out into a corridor. Come on, keep moving, someone yelled, but Rei held them back. Wait. The floor is moving. Even from where they were, Izuku and Mario could hear the heroes. Izuku heard Rei shout something and smiled slightly. She was okay, he was worried about nothing. The two of them weren't too bothered by the moving walks. They had realized quite quickly that if Mario used his quirk, Izuku could fly both of them around. They could fly right through, unbothered by moving walls or the floor. Izuku glanced down at Mario, and saw him. Grinning as a particular voice reached them. Izuku smiled as well and kept on moving. Tamaki Amajiki, he's the one in the white cloak, right? The one you grew up with? Mario grinned back up at him. Yep. We've known each other forever, kind of like. Izuku's grin faltered. Kind of like me and Kachan, right? You two must be close then. I'd like to meet him, after this. From what you've told me, he seems nice. Mario studied Izuku's expression, or what he could with Izuku's mask covering the top half of his face. He took a deep breath and decided to just ask him. Have you talked to Bakugo since the Camino Ward incident? Izuku looked down at Mario, trying to keep a straight face. No, not really. I know I should, but I don't know what I'd tell him. I don't know if I should forgive him. Mario shrugged. I don't know either, but it's your choice to make. Rei might tell you not to, but that's because she wants to protect you. Personally, I think that, so long as he's changed, you should, but that isn't my choice, or Rei's, it's your choice. But Rei and Toru. Not their decision. They're mad at him because of what he did, but they don't know him as well as you do. You'll understand his motives and thoughts better than they do. I get where they're coming from. I mean, what would you do if you found out that someone was responsible for your best friend's suicide? Izuku was quiet for a while, just flying them further into the base, occasionally stopping to take out whatever villain they came across. Eventually, they spotted two figures in the distance, a dark-haired man with a strange mask, and a small, white-haired girl, being dragged along behind him. The two heroes took a fighting stance and prepared to rush in, but not before Izuku made his decision. He turned to Mario, looking more determined than the blonde had ever seen him. After this, he said, I'll forgive him. Izuku's face turned determined and he flew at Overhaul, aiming a kick at his head. The villain was quick to react, turning and trying to grab Izuku's leg, but it just passed right through him. Mario took advantage of the distraction and grabbed Rei. He started to run when the floor broke, spikes appearing out of nowhere. Mario cradled Rei close to his chest as he avoided the spears that stabbed at them, the ground itself turning against them. Izuku attacked Overhaul again, keeping an eye on Mario as he protected the terrified girl. He had to protect them, whatever the cost. As he attacked again, he said a small prayer in his mind, hoping that, if there was a god, they heard it. Please, he prayed, keep them safe, and make sure Rei gets here quickly. Rei wasn't surprised when she saw those two familiar faces appear. She had warned Nighteye that it was likely that they would be there, and now, she was fighting against them. Can you take your mask off, please? Toga asked, grinning widely as she spun a knife in her hand. I want to be able to see your cute face when I cut you. Rei quickly dodged as Toga ran at her, her knife shimmering red with the blood of the pro hero lying at Rei's feet. Rei glanced down at the pro hero, hoping they were still alive. Though if they're dead, she thought, I could use them as a shield. She winced at her own thought, hating herself for thinking it, yet knowing that it might give her the advantage, if she was forced to do it. She backed away from Toga's knife and her back hit the wall. She cursed to herself. She had let herself be cornered in a small space. In too small an area, she couldn't get her tentacles out, making her quirk completely useless unless she could find a wider space. She maybe should have mentioned this weakness to Nighteye, though the heroes still think she has a short-range telekinetic quirk. Toga sprinted at her, her knife shooting forward, towards Rei's head. Rei ducked, hearing the clang of metal slamming into stone. She kicked Toga's legs, knocking the villain to the floor, and grabbed the knife, felling blood drip off of the blade and onto her hand. She blinked down at the girl in front of her, momentarily hesitating before slamming the knife through Toga's right hand. Toga yelped as Rei yanked the knife out of her hand. Rei leaned back against the wall, hoping to catch her breath, closely watching the villain, still lying on the floor, clutching her hand to her chest, gritting her pointed teeth. Rei sighed, relaxing slightly as Toga didn't seem to be trying to fight her anymore, and stepped over the villain, when something knocked her feet out from under her. In an instant, Toga had her pinned to the floor, a sadistic grin growing on her face as she reached for Rei's mask, ripping it from her face. Rei wriggled underneath her, trying to shake her off, or, at the very least, get her mask back. Toga just giggled, raising a knife to the squirming vigilante's face. Rei felt the knife prick the corner of her eye, where his scar was. "You're so pretty, Spectre. If it wasn't for this ugly scar, you totally my type. Maybe I should just..." The knife dug in deeper, but Rei gritted her teeth and resisted the urge to scream, "Cut it off." Rei closed her eyes, waiting for Toga to slice her face open. Blood dripped down her face and she slowly opened her eyes. That wasn't her blood. The hero Toga had stabbed had dragged themselves to their feet and ripped Toga off of her. Rei stared for a second before grabbing her mask from the floor and putting it on again. The hero seemed to be too preoccupied with yoga to have paid much attention to Rei's uncovered face, and Rei sighed in relief, pushing the villain to the floor. The hero nodded to her. "I'll keep her here, you go. Find Phantom and land Million." Rei nodded, gripping Toga's knife in her hand. "Right." She turned and sprinted down the hall, hoping she didn't find any more villains. Mirio and Izuku stood in front of Eri, glaring at the villain before them. Overhaul glared back at them. They had been fighting continuously, waiting for the other heroes to arrive. Izuku was starting to become worried about Rei. She had promised to be quick, and, from what he had seen, the layout wasn't too complicated. She should be here by now. Overhaul slammed his hand into the floor and it broke up, again. Izuku grabbed Eri, the two of them flying into the air, out of the way of the spikes that Mirio easily stepped through. Izuku flew at the floor, passing Eri to Mirio and disappearing through the stone. Overhaul looked around, waiting for Izuku to reappear somewhere in the room. When Izuku shot out from behind Overhaul, he was ready, easily avoiding Izuku's attack and causing part of the ceiling to hurtle towards him. If Izuku was alive, he would have been crushed. He moved back to Mirio, signaling for him to put Eri down. Mirio placed the girl down, wrapping her up in his cape, and both of them started to attack Overhaul, shouting to each other. "To the left. Aim higher. Duck." Overhaul barely dodged the barrage of attacks, but the two weren't disheartened. They carried on launching various attacks at the man before them, until they heard the clock of a gun loading. In an instant, both of them had turned their attention away from Overhaul, and to the villain, lying off to the side of the battlefield, aiming his gun at Eri. Mirio reacted instantly, jumping in front of her as the bullet sped towards them. He braced for impact, but it never happened. Instead, there was a flash of a blue-gray color, and a shout of pain. Izuku collapsed to the floor, gripping his chest. The scream that echoed through the room was the worst sound Mirio had ever heard, or ever would hear. It was full of sorrow and pain. Of apologies left unsaid. Of friends, so close yet so far. A scream of pure agony. He sprinted to Izuku's side, taking the green-haired boy in his arms. Izuku was hyperventilating, as though trying to force aim into lungs that had been ripped apart. Tears were falling down his face, and he looked up at Mirio with eyes that had already begun to glaze over. Mirio reached up to remove his mask, but Izuku stopped him, smiling weakly up at Mirio. "And no. I want to have the mask on. I want to die as the hero, Phantom." Mirio shook his head. "No, you aren't dying. Not here. We'll get you out of here, we'll get you to hospital." Izuku's eyes didn't seem to shine anymore, despite the tears that were still running down his face. "Don't you remember, Mirio?" he asked. "I'm already dead." Footsteps ran into the area they were in, and Izuku Sori stood there, looking around for him. Their eyes met and Rei paled, her face turning horrified, her mouth opened as she shouted something that Izuku couldn't hear. Izuku. Rei watched her tears slowly drip onto the floor, leaving 2 dark spots. She pushed her hair out of the face, not wanting her view to be obstructed for so much as a second. Her hands balled into fists and she desperately fought the urge to punch everything in sight. Grief she thought was dead and buried, rose up to the surface in a tsunami of emotion that she couldn't conceal, despite her best efforts. She just sat there, kneeling on the cold, hard floor, staring at what lay in front of her. Something that still didn't quite make sense to her, no matter how hard she thought about it, no matter how much time she had, she just couldn't comprehend it. Next to her, Mirio knelt, in a similar state to her. Tears stained his face, though they had already stopped running long ago. These stains, he knew, would never wash out. They would always be there, a sign of his constant grief. In his hands, he clutched a familiar cloak. It was a blue-gray color and was fairly plain on its own, as though it was part of a costume if sewn sorts, like one a hero would wear. And a hero had worn it. Footsteps approached behind them, but neither of them had to turn to see who it was. Someone else collapsed to their knees beside them, tears streaming down their invisible face. Toru sat beside her sister, tears streaking down her face and dripping onto the floor, leaving 2 more dark spots. The grief that crashed over them in waves was constant and infinite, something they would live the rest of their lives with, a constant reminder of their own failure. Of Izuku Midoriya, the boy they failed to save. More footsteps approached them and Rei looked over her shoulder to see who it was who had come to disturb them. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, looking down at the 3 of them with an unreadable expression, bordering on sadness, but mixed in with inconceivable anger, though who that anger was directed at was a mystery. Perhaps it was them, for failing Izuku, or Izuku for getting himself killed, or himself, for the mountains of mistakes he had made. The mistakes that had led them to this point in time, where 4 heroes mourned the loss of a hero far greater than all of them. Rei wiped her tears and looked up at Bakugo. "I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't think this was your thing." Bakugo scowled at her. "What's that supposed to mean, ghosty?" Toru laughed slightly, though it sounded more like she was choking on tears. "Something must be really wrong. He can't even think up a good insult." Bakugo looked away from the 2, and looked at what stood in front of them. The others seemed to get the idea and went silent. "So, Mirio attempted to spark conversation. 3 years. Rei didn't even look at him as she spoke. "It feels like it was just yesterday. It feels like just yesterday that I..." She choked out a sob, unable to keep talking. Toru patted her back reassuringly and took over speaking. "He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve any of it. He was a hero, yet no one knows his name." They all fell silent again. "You know, it's been a while since I've seen you, Bakugo." Toru grinned up at him. "How's becoming the #1 hero going for you?" Bakugo's face twisted with rage. "Don't get all smug. You aren't even in the top 20, Invisibitch." Toru tutted at him. "Oh, but haven't you heard? Me and Rei are the highest-ranking hero duo of all time. You, however, are stuck in 2nd place, Bakuho." Mirio stepped in. "Okay, guys, let's not bring up hero rankings right now, okay?" Bakugo just scowled at him. "Easy for you to say." Mirio sighed. "I may be the #1 hero, but I wouldn't be a hero at all if it weren't for Izuku. I wish I had been able to do the same for him." Rei nodded slowly. "I don't think any of us would be heroes if it weren't for him. Even if I was a hero, me and Toru definitely wouldn't be working together." "Hey, have you stopped getting questions about why you share a hero name with an ex-vigilante yet?" Mirio asked, clearly happy that everyone has stopped arguing. Rei laughed. "Nope, still getting those questions. But what was I meant to do? Not use your vigilante name as your hero name?" Bakugo grunted. Rei shrugged. Well, me and Toru are a duo, so we have to have some connection between our hero names. Plus, I like the name Spectre. Toru laughed. Yeah, Poltergeist, and Spectre. That sounds better than whatever name you think she should have chosen. And you just used your name for your hero name because all your ideas got rejected. Bakugo opened his mouth to respond, but he saw the look Mirio gave him and just gave an annoyed grunt instead. Whatever. Rei smiled widely, tears still streaming down her face. I know we don't really see each other much anymore, but, thank you for coming. I'm sure Izuku will be happy that we still do something remember him by, even if it is just an annual thing. He's probably happier with it just being an annual thing. Toru pointed out. That way, we spend plenty of time doing hero work and still honor his memory. Rei laughed. Yeah, probably. His face then turned more solemn and she reached out in front of her, resting her hand on cold stone. The others seemed to recognize what she was doing and did the same, resting their hands next to hers, slowly warming the cold, smooth stone. Thank you, Izuku, for everything you did for us. THX for watching Skshnpai out and am making a Discord.